Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tshepho Modiba, and thanks for joining me. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Africa himself, Langa Madonko, investment principal at Zala Capital, for a closer look at the telecoms sector across sub-Saharan Africa. Langa, thank you for joining us. It's been a while.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It has been a while. Yeah.
Okay, let's jump straight into the sector. Lots going on. Where do you want to start?
I think just by way of overview, telecoms, very important sector, particularly for the African continent. Seems these days it's affecting everything from financial services to communications in terms of spreading news and so forth and so on, as well as agro-tech. Seems to be touching almost everything.
And that's particularly important given that, you know, we're moving towards the digital age. Internet of Things and all. So we probably are getting to a point where telcos actually probably has an effect on every sector.
Yeah, I mean, it has at present has an effect on everything. Logistics, tracking of fleets, all telco based, using SIM cards to monitor everything from how the driver behaves in terms of acceleration, braking, all that stuff. It's affecting e-commerce. And I think it will continue to have a big impact, particularly in accelerating how quickly Africa develops and gets to where it should be.
I guess what's also exciting is that in pockets of the continent, we're seeing a lot of innovation in terms of how to use the telecommunication facilities to come up with cool strategies. Yeah,
I think if you look at East Africa, of course, M-Pesa is legendary there in terms of money transfer. It's also developed a platform that allows for insurance products to be sold off mobile platforms. If you go to West Africa and you look at Nigeria, MTN is currently rolling out a system that is used in the agro space for tracking the movement of cattle across the different areas. Senegal, you have companies like Wari that use mobile platforms for their money transfer as well. Someone like EcoBank has also come out with a mobile app that allows you to transfer money across across 33 of the 34 countries where it has a presence on the African continent. And that's wholly enabled by the fact that Africa has got such a good penetration in terms of smartphones and mobile technology.
Okay, let's focus a little bit. So that's the big picture. What's happening in terms of the telcos environment right now? Let's start in East Africa.
Okay, I think the most significant thing in East Africa is currently there's legislation, particularly in Tanzania, that says all the telcos must list.
Right.
So we anticipate the legislation that said they needed to list by the end of this year.
So every single telcos producer within that market has to have something on the stock exchange.
Yeah. So all the mobile providers and all the players in the telco space that are large enough have to list. I think it's going to have a twofold impact. One, it's going to allow for greater liquidity because I think there's a lot of people who are going to flock towards those stocks because of also their impact in terms of the development of Tanzania. But secondly, also it's going to actually give us a good insight into where Tanzania is going because, like you said, most of the innovation is led from the mobile platform. So what the telecoms continue to roll out will continue to also give us further indicators into the rest of the economy.
And is there any local ownership criteria that's associated with this requirement to list?
Yeah, so the government has, in a previous bill, had said that local ownership should be at 25%.
Right.
And with these listings, they will be enforcing that. I think that's one of the characteristics of the new regime, that anything that was passed into law, they are making sure is enforced. So there will definitely be an uptake. What we are still trying to figure out from an investor's perspective is where the locals will be able to raise that money. But I think a significant portion of it will have to come from vendor and bank financing.
Now, who are the winners and losers here in terms of the telcos? Businesses, government, local communities. What's the investment implication of this decision?
I think it will draw a lot of liquidity. I think there will be interest from investors from the rest of the continent and from the rest of the globe in terms of getting exposure to some of the telcos because Tanzania is actually a sizable population of about 50 million people comparable to South Africa, but has a lower base from which it is growing. So there will be a lot of upside that will take in from that. So the telcos themselves will benefit because they are attractive to investors and because also of the regional integration play. that's happening in East Africa, there's also that potential upside that these telcos who are now listed on the Tanzanian Stock Exchange will now start being able and will be adequately financed for them to grow into the rest of the region.
And are there any individual companies here that you're actually keen to become a shareholder in?
Well, I think many of the companies we already have exposure through. For example, Vodacom, you'd have exposure through here locally.
Right.
We're trying to see what of the local innovative players in the telco space we can take a look at. I mean, there are some who are providing, who would be the equivalent of blue label telecoms here,
right,
for whom for the first time you'll have direct exposure to, who are providing payment solutions and who are providing solutions for utility payments as well as the sale of airtime.
Okay. So that's the environment there. So it's not necessarily negative. Could be positive depending on what the outlook is like. Yeah. Okay, let's move elsewhere in the continent. Anywhere else that you want to?
Yeah, I think also then to touch a little bit more on the MTN in Nigeria.
Right.
I think
the big gorilla.
Yeah, so I think they've had a little bit of trouble, but they too are set to list as one of the requirements that was put across by the regulators in terms of bringing down their penalty.
Right.
But we're also starting to see them play a little bit a greater role in terms of the innovation space. As I mentioned earlier, they are going into the agrotech where they are tracking cattle for farmers in the rural areas of Nigeria, which is a big play because we all know the Africa agro narrative is one that's growing, and so telcos are trying to now assert and find their own place within that bigger picture. And I think also in West Africa, one of the other big plays, like I said, is in the logistics space and how that plays out in the when linked with telcos, where we're having them playing a significant role in terms of tracking of the vehicles, tracking of how the drivers use them, refueling, all that stuff is now being mobile-based solutions are coming up for that. Which is a big thing.
So does that mean that you'd definitely take a look at, as a standalone investment, MTN Nigeria?
I think all of us are a little bit pansy when it comes to that, looking to see how the newest issues are resolved.
Right.
And also, well, we also have to take into cognizance the currency issues that Nigeria is currently facing. Okay. But fundamentally, I think the business is a good business and is one that, if it rides out all these things and you can figure out how to hedge out the currency risk, then is a company that's said to be in a good place.
So uncertainty is the gist of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move elsewhere. Anything else?
So I think also of mention of significance would be to mention the use of and the growth of telcos also in the North Africa.
Yeah.
Where of course we know what happened with Arab Springs, where mobile technology was the platform that was used for communicating what was happening during the Arab Springs, but now the reverse is being used. It's being used as a tool for nation building. And so most of the news platforms now use mobile technology to do this. And this, of course, then has a play and has an impact on data usage. Of course, you will see that there's been a shrinkage in that region as with everywhere else in terms of how much voice is used,
right,
and an increase in data.
Right.
And they have much more reasonable price points in terms of what their data costs. And that then brings it to a bigger market, and then they're making real good margins on the volumes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the big players there, and I guess the scope for growth within the data spectrum. How far are they? I know it's a fairly sophisticated market from a banking perspective. In terms of data usage, where are we in the global spectrum?
I think in terms of Africa and our usage of data, we are probably very well advanced, because for us, most of the solutions that we're able to deliver across the different sectors, because of the sparsity of many of the populations and because of the poor infrastructure, the more data is rolled out, the easier it becomes for us to then start to work on things like financial inclusion, for us to also have developed solutions around collection of tax revenue, payment of utilities. So we are seeing a lot of the innovation that's coming in Africa being mobile based, where the telcos are benefiting because we develop all these apps for delivery of products. We develop all these apps for monitoring of agricultural growth, and we use the telcos platforms, and most of it is data intensive, so they are really benefiting.
And that applies specifically to North Africa as well?
In North Africa, I think it's actually working a whole lot faster. I think if we went and cited examples of how they use telecoms and telecom solutions, for example, in the dairy production, you'd see that they are well advanced and well ahead of where the rest of the world is probably at. Right in that region, having one of the biggest dairy farms in the world, which is almost totally automated, and most of that is based on an internet-based solution.
And are there any specific companies that you would say this is how you should play this theme within the Egyptian or North African market as a whole, actually?
I think one of the things that I'll always continue to say is you need to look at sub-Saharan Africa in its totality,
right.
And rather all of Africa in its totality, and then you need to be aware of all the different factors, from risk to population growth to then individually looking at the countries.
Right.
And so it's difficult without being biased to then particularly say this is where you should go, and one needs to make an informed assessment.
Fair enough. Let's leave it there. Thanks to my guest, Mr. Africa, Langa Madonko, investment principal at Zala Capital. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's at Modiba_Tshepho and Langa at Langa Donks. And send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag Buy Africa. From myself and the team, goodbye.